The Laundry is proudly produced by Strise, the AML automation cloud.
I would not say it's an open secret, but you may spot certain firms that do not seem to do their required due diligence before onboarding their clients. There is a distinction between the different types of enablers. Those who have this as their business case of doing so, then those who are being misused, and then you have those kind of in between who kind of know that they're dealing with the client who may be shady, they have a feeling something may be going on, but they do it anyways because, well, it's lucrative.
It's money make a world go round.
Welcome to The Laundry, the podcast connecting AML, compliance, and financial crime to the real world. One of the dirtiest secrets of financial crime and money laundering is that there is a whole professional network of facilitators or enablers who help run the whole thing. Without these experts who bend or break the law, many criminals wouldn't have the first idea what to do, how to conceal their funds, dodge sanctions, or wash their criminal earnings. These enablers are hiding in plain sight, and there is nothing we can do about it.
I'm smart, you're dumb. I'm big, you're little. I'm right, you're wrong. And there's nothing you can do about it.
Or is there? I'm your host, Robin Lycka, Chief Investigator at Strise, and in this episode we are asking, how do we tackle the enablers of financial crime? We'll be discussing how does this network of enablers work and operate, what are the biggest challenges, and what are the solutions which could see us tackle this network directly. To dive into this topic, I'm here with Maíra Martini, Head of Policy and Advocacy at Transparency International, and Kristin Nordland Brattli, Partner at Wikborg Rein. Welcome to The Laundry, both of you. Maíra, can you tell our listeners about you, your background, and the goal of Transparency International?
Hi, thank you so much for having me here. It's really a pleasure. Yes, I'm with Transparency International, which is a global movement working in more than 100 countries around the world to end the injustice of corruption. And one of the topics and the issues we have been focusing on is the role of enablers, in particular because they have been facilitating corruption and money laundering across the globe.
Thank you. And Kristin, thanks for being here as well. What should our listeners know about you, your background, and Wikborg Rein?
Hi, and thank you so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be on. So I'm a partner at the Norwegian law firm Wikborg Rein. I work in the compliance and risk management department. We're an international law firm with presence in Norway, but also other places in the world, London, Singapore, and China. On my part, I work on a daily basis with all types of compliance-related questions, including anti-money laundering, anti-corruption, and sanctions. And I've also spent time working on these issues in Norway's biggest financial institution. So I've tackled these issues from several angles.
Very impressive. I took the liberty today of doing a quick ChatGPT summary of both of you, and it's extremely impressive, both of your backgrounds. I'm really happy to have you on, and I did check myself as well, and I think it came up something like certified degenerate out of Nesodden, nowhere near as impressive as you have. But I'm not going to do the full summary today, but you should really check out ChatGPT's summary of both of you. It's really impressive. But let's delve into the discussion. If we start by looking at how this professional network operates today, how would you both explain what an enabler is in one sentence? Maíra?
So we call an enabler a service provider that is providing a service that will end up helping a corrupt individual to hide, launder, and enjoy the proceeds of corruption.
Kristin, anything to add from your side?
That's quite similar from what I had to say. It's those professionals helping criminals to continue doing their illicit actions, whether it's concealing the origin of funds or facilitating other types of crimes.
And Maíra, let's say I'm a very successful drug lord with tons of cash at my disposal, but I have no understanding how to access this. How would I go about finding a facilitator?
So that's a good question. I think what is important here is that an enabler might know or not know that they are helping a corrupt individual. I think the number one way that the corrupt is looking for this type of service is to create a company. Usually an anonymous company that they can help. So this is the first, let's say, type of help they will look for. They're likely going to work with a lawyer that they trust. Sometimes they're going to be recommended by their banker to go and look for specific service by service corpus providers. There is no single way through which they find the enabler, right? I think there is a lot of the connections. There is knowing the other professionals that will point you to the right one that would be willing perhaps to do less checks or turn a blind eye to your background.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious as to how these relationships start and who's approaching who. I was thinking about it the other day. Like, I read this article about how the facilitators are groomed, recruited, and I was thinking, like, could there even be a situation where these organized criminals are sponsoring educations for these facilitators? That it starts that early on, Kristin?
Well, I think that varies quite a bit depending what kind of enabler you are looking at. So, for example, you have those who know what they're doing, that they're doing this professionally. Of course, that's a different kind of start to that relationship than where they could be groomed quite early on, probably as early as education, but most likely when they're done with education. And then you have those who are kind of more misused for money laundering or evasion purposes. And that's a bit of a different end of the spectrum.
Very interesting. So the legal profession, that's one of the sectors considered to pose a risk for money laundering. Kristin, as someone who's operating on the other side of the divide to the enablers, do the people in the industry know who's working with the criminals? Is it kind of like an open secret? Like, if you know that person?
I would not say it's an open secret, but you may spot certain firms that do not seem to do their required due diligence before onboarding their clients, put it like that. And as I said, that there is a distinction between the different types of enablers. Those who have this as their business case of doing so, then those who are being misused. And then you have those kind of in between who kind of know that they're dealing with the client who may be shady. They have a feeling something may be going on, but they do it anyways because, well, it's lucrative. And I think in this third category, at least on the international scene, I believe you have a feeling of who are more risk willing than others, to put it like that.
And when it comes to the legal services, what are the enablers offering here?
So a key point is to hide criminal activities through legitimate business operations. So in order to do this, you may want to set up companies, complex structures, and you need to know how to do this legally. So for example, if there is a sanctioned individual who wants to trade with Western companies, it is essential to hide who you are and your status as a sanctioned person. And in doing so, you would need help from lawyers or accountants in setting up complex layers of ownership through multiple companies in multiple jurisdictions, and perhaps put a trust on the top of the ownership chain just to make the obfuscation complete. So looking behind the curtain, it is more difficult if the structures themselves appear as being legitimate, and it also requires a lot of resources to uncover the most complex shell structures.
And Maíra, what are some of the most shocking examples of this kind of enabling that you've seen?
There are many of them. I think in particular because most cases of corruption that we have been analyzing are cases of money, public funds stolen from really poor or middle-income countries that enablers are helping to then transfer and usually end up in luxury real estate somewhere in the global north, right? So most of them are very shocking. There is one case that I think is really representative of many of the issues, which is a case involving a politician from Brazil, where actually I come from. And this politician opened bank accounts in Switzerland, as one usually does when they want to hide funds. And here the manager of the bank played a crucial role. The manager of the bank was actually flying to Brazil to enlist new clients, something that is not allowed. It's illegal to do. And this manager held the relationship with the other enablers. So he would pick up the phone and call corporate service providers and lawyers in different countries that not in Brazil and not in Switzerland that would then help open companies. These companies would be used for other bank accounts and for trusts and so on. And then you have credit cards and real estate all being bought. And in this, you had at least 10 or 12 different enablers in different sectors that had been approached at some point. And none of them asked the questions that had to be asked. None of them reported suspicious activities. We learned all of that because there was coincidentally an investigation that started because of something else that not this case. And because one of the enablers was part of this scheme, an organized crime scheme, he was tapped and led to uncovering a whole other switch of case and corruption across the country and across the region as well.
Yeah, there are some really high-profile cases. We've talked a little bit about the enablers in legal and financial world, but maybe a bit about the public sector as well. So we saw the top police officer in Spain. He was at the point the head of fraud and AML, and they arrested him and found like 20 million euros in the walls of his house. So that's, as far as I've understood, is part of one of the country's largest ever cocaine busts as well. But what can someone in public office offer when it comes to facilitating financial crime, Kristin?
So I guess a key topic for those in public office is the power they enjoy through their position. So they can use their authority to take or influence decisions. They can bypass legal protocols, manipulate public records, while at the same time, of course, appearing as serving the people and the higher common good. And that's also a reason why dealing with public officers represent a higher risk of corruption and money laundering, and also why banks and other regulated entities will have to identify PEPs, politically exposed persons, and take active steps to mitigate the risk that they do represent.
And I guess there's always that aspect of if someone at the top is openly corrupt, then it spreads like a virus throughout the organization as well. It becomes a business culture. And the lower in the hierarchy you are, the more afraid you are that you're going to lose your job if you're not doing what these enablers are requesting you to do, despite the fact that you might know that it is wrong.
That's, I guess, the complete opposite of what we're talking about when we talk about setting the tone from the top in a compliance perspective. So that's also an illustration of how wrong it can go if you have the complete incentive to do things.
Exactly. So how big are the benefits for those willing to take part in this? Does it outweigh the potential punishment of being caught?
Well, I don't know how much could be made concretely, but obviously money is the key driver for doing this. And I'm sure that those who are involved are very good at putting a price on the risk that they do take.
Let's move on to the challenges here. Maíra, from what you've seen with Transparency International and your own reporting, what's the biggest challenge in the way of combating this problem?
I think there are two biggest challenges we see. One is related to regulating these enablers, right? Unfortunately, a lot of big economies still don't have adequate regulation in place, meaning that lawyers, real estate agents, accountants, and so on are not required to do any checks and are not required to report any suspicious transactions to authorities. This is the case in the US, for example. So I think there's still quite a way to go in making sure that we set the adequate rules, we have the adequate rules in place, and that those enablers are at least required to do some checks and report suspicious activity. The second kind of group of challenge, let's say, is more around enforcement and supervision, right? So there are many countries that already regulate. Across Europe, for example, regulation has been in place for quite some time. But then you have a challenge with supervision and enforcement. One of the key challenges we see related to supervision is the fact that in many countries, supervision is the responsibility of the professional association themselves. And this, of course, generate a lot of different set of challenges because one, they not necessarily might have the resources in place to do this type of checks and to do on-site inspections and so on. And second, there might actually be a conflict of interest since you'll be looking into whether your peers are doing the checks required and you'll be sanctioning your own peers. So I think there is still a lot of room for us to discuss how to improve supervision and then how to ensure enforcement once you know that someone might have facilitated corruption or money laundering, particularly across borders. One final point on the incentive question, because I think this is a really important question that I don't think we are quite there yet. And if you look at, in particularly in the financial sector, the incentives are pretty much on bringing new clients and bringing more money. So that's how the performance pay systems are structured and so on. So I think as long as nobody cares about, are you doing the right checks? As long as this is not really considered as incentive for you to do the right thing, I think it's going to be very difficult to change the culture, the way that people do business.
Yeah, great point. It's like two-sided. There's on one side, there's too much stick and not enough carrot. And on the other side, there is too much carrot and not enough stick. Okay, so Kristin, as someone operating in Norway, do we put too much trust in professionals where maybe we should be more skeptical?
Well, in the Nordic societies in general, we had quite a high level of trust in various types of professionals, also in the legal profession. Also in banks, for example, one of the reasons why Nordic and Norwegian banks are attractive for money laundering purposes is that they enjoy quite a high level of trust internationally. But there have been quite a few developments, especially the past year, damaging the reputation, I would say. I mean, in Denmark, we have, of course, the Black Swan documentary involving lawyers and other facilitators. And in Norway, we also have this example of the lawyer, Mr. Ausal, who for decades orchestrated this Ponzi scheme, where he raised loan capital from investors, but with no actual borrower of the funds. And where the now deceased lawyer, he's charged with aggravated fraud, and the claims are really high, about 700 million kroner. So I guess both the Black Swan and the Osdal case, they are extreme examples. But at the same time, I think that could perhaps serve as examples that we in the Nordics maybe have been a bit too naive if you measure by the public reaction and the surprise that this could actually happen. But of course, there is absolutely no reason to stay naive. Given today's geopolitical challenges, a lot of issues with sanctions circumventions, more advanced schemes of money laundering. And I guess that many state actors and criminals would still see Norwegian professionals as quite useful facilitators for criminal purposes.
Yeah, good point. I think the Black Swan was a great example of how it sent ripples through the compliance society. Like everyone was super surprised about how open it was and how easy it was to even uncover this in a documentary. But Maíra, is the biggest challenge in identifying or is it prosecuting these potential enablers?
I think both, and one is connected to the other because it's so difficult to prove intent and knowledge. It's very difficult to prosecute, right? I think that's one of the main challenges because it's very easy for someone to say, well, I didn't know. No, I just helped him open a company. I had no idea how the company will be used. Or I did some checks. I did some background checks. It looked like everything was legitimate. I didn't know, and so on. So I think that's the challenge, that to prove really the knowledge and the intent. And that's why some countries are taking the step of trying to regulate more carefully and really strengthening the sanctions when it comes to anti-money laundering checks. So you need to be able to prove that you did everything you had to do and that you reported and so on and so forth.
And Kristin, do you think there's a lack of support from the governments in tackling this problem?
I don't know if there's a lack of support. At least there certainly is an increased focus on this role now. So, for example, in Norway, quite recently, it was announced that we're establishing a new unit to strengthen the fight against financial crimes. And this unit will also boost the efforts against the professionals that help the criminals. So at least here, it certainly is on the agenda. So I think it's on the agenda, but always you could do more as the tactics and what the enablers do will evolve. There's a need to continue to focus on the matter.
And Maíra, maybe from a global perspective, on your experience, what's your take on the government support?
I think what we have been seeing across different countries is that law enforcement authorities and financial intelligence units are under-resourced. And this, of course, impacts their ability of us targeting this type of crimes, which are usually very complex, transnational, and so on. So I think this definitely is impacting, how many actions and how many cases are being uncovered and investigated. So definitely we would need better resourced law enforcement authorities, better resourced financial intelligence units, and also ensuring that they have access to the type of data they need to be able to detect and uncover and prosecute crimes, which is currently not the case.
Okay, we'll be right back to talk about the potential solutions which could make a difference. Don't go anywhere.
Strise turns KYB from a costly burden into an automated winner. But don't just take my word for it. Let's hear what one of Europe's largest payment companies, Vipps Mobile Pay, has to say.
In the olden days, there were people sitting there Googling the company name, all the brand names, the CEO and so on. I think they used more effort into the process than evaluating the outcome, and that's what I'm looking for. I would say Strise definitely helped us improve our productivity. So working more efficiently, working more risk-based, automating repetitive processes, and by this helping us, of course, to decrease costs, but also improve customer satisfaction. Being able to make low-risk decisions automated without long waiting times, that's of course extremely important. Strise, one tool that works in all our markets, that we are able to collaborate, to have streamlined processes, to have optimized processes, to have one tool, one source of truth that is collecting all the input from a lot of other sources, so you don't need to open 3 different tools, but everything consolidated in one place. Either you are part of the scalable automation game and work risk-based as everyone else, or you will not survive the competition. Strise is really helping us realizing those ambition and goals.
Explore the AML Automation Cloud. Visit strise.ai for more information.
So, we've looked at how professional enablers work and the challenges when it comes to stopping them, but let's move on to looking at solutions. If you could both have a magic wand and something big could happen to tackle the enablers of financial crime tomorrow, what would you both look to? Kristin?
Well, that's a big question. Well, if you introduce a perfect global registry of ultimate beneficial owners, and that actually did reflect the real beneficiaries, that would be a very nice start. And what takes up a lot of time in the KYC work is trying to uncover who's behind the company. So it would help if there's nowhere to actually hide.
Great answer. Funny you should say that. We actually discussed that in the previous episode of uncovering the beneficial owners. And I believe it was Marit's answer as well. A universal beneficial owner registry that actually works. And what about you, Maíra? What would your magic wand do?
I will build on Kristin's magic one. And I would say we need a global asset register, which goes beyond the ownership of companies, but also would cover ownership of other assets, because then would actually make the job of enablers a lot harder, because to hide then the ownership of assets and the transactions related to it would be a lot more difficult. So a global asset register.
Yeah, it's a super interesting thought there. I've been looking at, my favorite pastime activity is looking at sanctioned Russian oligarchs and what they own and what they know. And it's always so interesting to look at the likes of journalists, investigative journalists, how much they're able to uncover compared to just a basic company registry. Super interesting. But we've seen some high-profile arrests recently related to facilitation and enabling. Does this create a domino effect? Do you think so, Maíra?
I think we're still far from that. The probability of being caught and the probability of facing sanctions is still very, very low. So I think it's good if we have more examples, and hopefully it helps changing also the culture, but I think we are not there yet.
And Kristin, how big of a difference could education play in stopping those in the legal profession from taking this route?
Well, I guess it could play a role for those who are kind of misused for those kind of purposes. If you do this for a living, I don't know how much education would help, because you already know you're doing something illegal. But a big problem is that not everyone is good enough at spotting the red flags. You might only see part of a transaction where it's cross-border and there are a lot of actors involved. And training in that respect, helping to know what should you look for and what should you do about these issues. I think that could obviously play a big role. And also coming back to the issue about the tone from the top, that you do have kind of a culture in the company, also not just to speed through each and every transaction, but to actually ask the correct questions and put a stop on it if you do find some issues that should be handled.
Yeah, I think we're already seeing some of this as well in the AML D6 We're seeing the suitability requirement for working within AML and compliance. So it will be an increased focus from the top as well, hopefully. Maíra, what solutions are we already seeing out there in the world that are making a difference?
Yeah, so I mentioned before as a challenge the supervision issue, and you just talked about the new anti-money laundering directive at the EU level. One of the solutions is now to ensure that a public agency will be responsible for checking whether the professional associations are doing their job. And I think that's a good step. And the anti-money laundering authority at the EU level, I also think it's a really good step in trying to deal with cross-border transactions, right? Kristin was just mentioning sometimes you might just see one part of a transaction, which makes it very difficult. So having a kind of supranational body that has a broader overview of transactions and what banks are doing and what other enablers are doing, I think it's a positive step.
And to bring it back to the very top of the show and the initial question, how can we tackle the enablers of financial crime? Kristin?
So we've been through a lot, but just to summarize a few points, I would kind of emphasize awareness is really important. Capacity building is also important. And also Maíra's issue about resources. So I think to staffing up and having sufficient resources to actually go after the criminals, that's very important. And also the willingness to do so and specifically target enablers. I think the US in this respect, for example, with regards to sanctions, so we know that sanctions, evasions, a key reason why sanctions are not efficient enough is because of those help people evade sanctions. And there we do see very concrete actions where they sanction also those who actually help people evade sanctions, so the facilitators as such.
So before we end this episode, we're going to dish out some quick fire questions for you both. Are you ready?
Yes.
Kristin, you answer first. Maíra, you answer second, okay?
Okay.
True or false? The professional enablers of financial crime are hiding in plain sight.
True.
True.
In which sectors are professional enablers having the most influence? Legal, law enforcement, compliance, banking, public office?
They all have key roles, but let's say banking and insiders in banking just because of their proximity to transactions.
The financial sector, banks, non-financial, legal.
Could we ever truly stop the enablers? Yes or no?
No.
No.
That's a bit bleak.
We can make their lives more difficult.
Good answer. Why does tackling enablers matter in the real world?
It's crucial to reduce economic crimes.
Yeah, their actions impact the lives of people across the globe negatively.
And that brings this spin of The Laundry to an end. Maíra and Kristin, thank you both so much for joining me. Where can people find and connect with you?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn and also the Wikborg Rein website. You can find me there.
Yeah, also on LinkedIn, Blue Sky, but have a look at the Transparency International website where we post blogs and articles on this and other topics.
Money makes the world go round.
Thank you all for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, check out the back catalog and follow The Laundry on your podcast platform of choice. We'd also love for you to share the podcast on your social media channels. Tell your colleagues about it. Drop an episode in a group chat. It really helps people to find us. If you have a story that you think we should be talking about, you can comment on the Strise LinkedIn page, my LinkedIn, or email laundry@strise.ai. Your host for this episode was me, Robin Lycka. Our producer was Matthew. Our editor was Dominic. And our engineer was Nicholas. The Laundry is proudly produced by Strise, the AML automation cloud. Visit strise.ai for more information and see you next time.
Money makes the world go round. It makes the world go round.
Counting flowers on the wall, that don't bother me at all. Playing solitaire till dawn with the deck of 51. Smoking cigarettes and watching Captain Kangaroo. Now don't tell me I've nothing to do.
The Laundry is proudly produced by Strise, the AML automation cloud.